Welcome to another reteach of Humanities 231, Southwestern Christian College. I'm your instructor, Dr. Barry Graham. This is a reteach over test number 3, and as usual, we'll be going over questions that prove to be particularly challenging for most of the students in the class. On test number 3, we had a question: a central urban community controlling the surrounding countryside was called a, and then you had a number of choices. You'll need to remember this was an important concept within Greek society. It was called the polis. One of the ways that you can remember this is Superman's hometown is Metropolis. That means big city. Metro, big, polis, a city or community. So maybe that will help you to remember it. Question number 2 proved to be difficult as well. The 8th century BCE was crucial to Greek culture because human and animal figures appear in works of art. This was a huge step forward, and of course whenever human and animal figures are depicted, this gives us particular insight into that culture. So that proves to be very, very important and a dramatic shift. Question number 3, orientalizing refers to, now this is kind of an old-fashioned word. The Orient was a word we used to refer to the East. Now it's more Asian, or we use other terms nowadays. But in art and in sculpture and those kinds of visual arts, orientalizing refers to the use of sphinxes and winged human figures. Question number 7 had to do with the dualist philosophy, and we just simply ask you that the dualists believed in what kind of things. The main things we're looking at here is a perfect, unchanging world. That was very crucial to the dualist philosophy. Another question had to do with the central principle of the classical ideal. Now we're talking about the Greek classical ideal. And in this sort of thing, we're talking about that existence can be ordered and controlled. The Greeks were very big on that. They were always looking for something to establish order in terms of their types of thinking. It was reflected in their art. So order and control, very, very important among the Greeks. Another question: the transition from primitive law to civilization is the subject of, and here we're giving you a choice between the various dramatic plays of the day. Drama, very, very important among the ancient Greeks. If you wanted to get a message out, they didn't have TV, movies, these kinds of things. So if you wanted to get a message out, actually the ideal way in Greek society was by way of these plays. They would usually produce 3 of them. It was a trilogy, just like we have movies that are trilogies today. But this particular one, where it talked about primitive law and that transition from primitive law to civilization, was the Oresteia. Another question: in his concern for realism and social injustice, the tragic writer or the tragedian closest to our own time would be, and you had a number of choices, but we're looking for Euripides. Another question dealt with Plato's works. Plato, of course, being the famous Greek philosopher. Plato's works were intended not so much as instruction, which is ironic because he ran a school for the Greek boys, but they were not so much for instruction, but more as a challenge to think seriously. The Greeks believed, as many do today, that if they teach you to think, then you can figure out a lot of things. And so it's not so much on specific instruction as it is to ponder and think seriously. We mentioned these dramatic works, these plays. Some were comedy, some were tragedy. But the purpose of tragedy for the Greek philosopher Aristotle was to provide what they called a catharsis, or What we mean by a catharsis is a cleansing of the soul. Another question, and we're not showing the entire question here, but I will state it. Apollo's intervening in the battle between the Lipiths and Centaurs on the temple of Zeus represents the authority of reason. The authority of reason. Now, you'll remember Apollo, of all the gods, really appealed to those who valued reason higher than the emotions. So it makes sense that Apollo would be involved in this. On this question, we dealt with the term entasis, the different distances and thickness of columns in the Greek temples, and it refers to an outward leaning of the entablature, and they're carefully designed to do a certain thing. They have this slight outward curvature, and it's designed to create a perfect visual appearance in the Greek temples. Of course, the Greeks were very big on these temples, made all kinds of different styles of columns, and these were prominent in Greek culture. On the next one, we refer to the sculptor who had the greatest influence on later Hellenistic art, and this was, of course, Lysippus. Lysippus had the greatest influence as far as all of the great Greek sculptors. One important influence on the Hellenistic period was the memory of the life of Alexander, and this, of course, refers to Alexander the Great, the greatest of the ancient Greek rulers. He had a worldwide empire, at least the world as they knew it at that time. He was said to have conquered the entire world by the age of 33, and that was, of course, very young in life. So, an incredible ruler and conqueror. And this had the greatest influence on the Hellenistic period. Now remember, Hellenistic refers to the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks didn't refer to themselves as Greeks. They referred to themselves as the Hellenes, a people who shared a common language, religion, culture, these kinds of things. And so it's referred to as the Hellenistic period. This question refers to the altar of Zeus at Pergamum. And there's a number of choices on this particular question. Carefully reproduced many textures in stone. It expresses violent movements and emotions. It displays virtuosity and concern with sensuality instead of rationality. In this particular case, all of those are correct, so we would say all of the above.